Usually, when a fandom has a bad reputation, it's due to loud individuals that do something heinous or deemed problematic. Like the Dream SMP fandom and fans being known for doxing, or My Hero Academia fans being associated with the person who allegedly spread their period blood on a poster and posted it to TikTok. Or with Homestuck and the array of cosplay horror stories. None of these things are actually representative of the entire fandom, but well-known, wild stories and infamous fan behavior become what people think of when thinking of these groups. Unbelievable stories like the Homestuck Sharpie bath, true or not, begin to shape how people view these fandoms and those who are loud about liking the pieces of media these fandoms are all about. There becomes this stereotype of if you like said thing, you must also be like that one person who did something outrageous. If you're a fan of this, you also behave and think in a particular type of way. However, there are some fandoms that gain a negative reputation without the circus of wild fans, without the pervasiveness of fan behavior that weird people out. Killing Stalking and its fandom is one of those, in my opinion, and let me explain why I think that. First, let me set the stage. It's winter connecting 2016 and 2017. Yuri on Ice is Tumblr's little darling, and everyone is high on the euphoria of a cute gay romance. The anime that was a phenomenon is wrapping up, and everyone is looking for the next big thing. Ravenous fans seeking to engage with more queer media, pouncing on the first thing that dips its toe into the mainstream. Enter Killing Stalking, a psychological horror dark romance series that started publishing in March of 2016, getting an official English translation later that fall. Just a handful of chapters to its name at the time, Killing Stalking swept through the Tumblr Fujodanshi communities like a storm. Blogs who had been posting about Yuri on Ice were now reblogging gore. The tonal whiplash between Yuri on Ice and Killing Stalking does not make sense. It is incredibly wild, and despite being there at the time and writing this pipeline, I genuinely still can't believe that was the pipeline. It definitely was, and I will never get over that. Here we are, almost a decade later, ready to revisit this fever dream. Obligatory content warning here. If you are unfamiliar with this webcomic, Killing Stalking comes with a slew of content warnings. If the name alone doesn't give anything away, this series deals with themes of abuse, assault, and it is very graphic. That being said, this video does not really go into it, but just be aware if you decide to read the comic afterwards. This video is mostly spoiler-free since we will be discussing the plot pretty vaguely, part anecdotal history, part me gathering my thoughts. Let's talk about Killing Stalking and why I think the fandom has a bad reputation. Yoonbum, our sympathetic creep, has been infatuated with a kind and handsome man, Sang-woo. He thinks about him all the time, thinks that Sang-woo would find him off-putting, and believes he can't shoot his shot because he's a guy. So instead, Yoonbum stalks Sang-woo, finding out where he lives and eventually breaking into his house. However, his little adventure into Sang-woo's home does not go as planned. Sang-woo returns home, forcing Yoonbum into hiding, where he finds out that Sang-woo isn't as he seems. The man is actually a serial killer who currently has a victim in his basement. Sang-woo descends into the basement where he discovers the intruder, and he shatters the man's ankles, gaining another victim. A meet-cute like that was controversial, to say the least, but an interesting hook. From the get-go, readers are met with a setup that leads very well to a psychological horror that's main plot point is the relationship between the two main characters. The early chapters detail Yoonbum's physical abuse, forced feminization, and the new daily life he has at Sang-woo's. Sang-woo has Yoonbum playing housewife, or mom, while he continues to live his own life, and even brings home more victims to slaughter, making Yoonbum complicit in his crimes. At the time Killing Stalking gained a fast and large following on Tumblr, there were only 13 chapters out. I binged all 13 chapters in one night while visiting my grandma on Christmas break. What a great little bedtime story. The selling point, at least based on what was being said on Tumblr, was that Killing Stalking was the new gay romance story. It was the next BL to follow up the highs of Yuri on Ice as far as Tumblr was concerned. And anyone who was publicly into the gay ice skating anime was told to check out Killing Stalking. The horror elements downplayed in favor of propping up the fact that it did have queer characters. As someone who was there, I strongly believe this is the start of Killing Stalking and the fandom gaining its negative reputation. As more and more people started reading the comic and recommending it as the next big gay media to follow Yuri on Ice, more and more people began to see Killing Stalking watered down to just a romance instead of its primary genre, psychological horror. And it was also being recommended to people regardless of their preferences of media and their age, because Killing Stalking is an 18+ story. Yuri on Ice is not. This caused a few things. One, people walking into the series expecting something more lighthearted, less graphic, and more romantic, walking away feeling traumatized. Two, people watching in horror thinking that the art of media literacy was lost and that people didn't actually know Killing Stalking was a horror story before anything else. And three, people watching from the outside in horror thinking that fans were romanticizing violence and fetishizing gay men. The comparison to Yuri on Ice made all of the above worse, because the only thing that these two series have in common is its depiction of queer characters and being popular on Tumblr. I say this as a fan of both pieces of media, but neither story centered its queerness in a way that makes bridging such a large jump in genres logical. But for the most part, for a period of time during the winter of 2016 and 2017, Tumblr loved Killing Stalking. It was widely praised and talked about, and the fandom was growing rapidly for better or worse. After the initial setup of stalker turned victim, Killing Stalking started to venture more into the psychology of being in Yoonbum's situation. We see him attempt to poison Sang-woo, we see him try to escape, only to find out that his efforts are futile. Sang-woo's home is isolated in an empty neighborhood. Yoonbum's cries for help have no ears to fall on. And when his pleas for help do have ears to fall on, no one believes him. Sang-woo takes Yoonbum out in public to a college event, and we see Yoonbum try to reach out, but be brushed off. He's weird, he's off-putting. He's stuck in Sang-woo's clutches no matter what he does. After this, we see Yoonbum fall into becoming more of a partner to Sang-woo in some way, despite also being his victim. It's an exploration of a person growing desperate, becoming complacent in their situation because that's what is safest. It gets to the point that Yoonbum no longer reaches out when in public by himself, despite wanting to. He feels he won't be taken seriously. He is fully within Sang-woo's grasp and does not see a way out, so he'll make do with the life that he has. Sang-woo does become kinder in some ways as well. Yoonbum is still a victim, still a hostage, but sometimes he's treated more like a partner. They go on trips together, they wear matching clothes, they kill together. It's a relationship from hell, but it's still a relationship, and Sang-woo has found himself the abuser and the protector of this weird little man. As Killing Stalking cemented itself as a popular work amongst die-hard horror and BL fans, and concerned onlookers made their disgust well known, it started to become somewhat taboo to publicly enjoy Killing Stalking. At least that was true in certain pockets of the internet that I guess found myself in. However, these pockets were becoming more common. It also didn't take long for anime and manga YouTubers to start covering the manhwa with clickbait disgust and fake outrage that drew in clicks and views, but also opened up Killing Stalking and its fandom to more people, many of which were confused and freaked out about how people would enjoy such a crazy comic. The greater discussion of this series was led by people who were farming outrage. Look, Killing Stalking does have a wild premise and absolutely can be a lot for readers. I feel like that is an objective fact, but I don't think there's anything wrong with reading a horror romance comic. And I don't think there's anything wrong with exploring the more problematic themes present in Killing Stalking, at least in fiction. These are drawings on a screen, not real people. Nor are real people being harmed in the making of the comic. It's ethical gore. The characters aren't even minors. It's genuinely healthier for people who dislike this comic to not engage with it. Get it off their timeline to make room for things that they actually like. But Killing Stalking was becoming talked about in a sensationalized way, inviting others to stop and gawk at the grotesque and take their discomfort out on fans. Because people don't know how to sit with their own discomfort and haven't for a while now. This isn't the same thing as being triggered by something. I'm talking about the feeling of when you see something in media you don't really like that makes you go, huh, that's kind of gross. Or that is kind of upsetting. Distinctly not the same thing as seeing something that triggers a panic attack, a PTSD episode, or some other kind of negative mental health spiral. This inability to manage discomfort and then disengage with something isn't exclusive to Killing Stalking and how it's talked about online. And this comic sure as hell didn't start the issue either. But this is a factor into why people talk about the comic the way that they did and still do. It's a factor to its reputation and the reputation of the fandom. Because the public perception shifted from, OMG, that's so gay, to, hey, this is kind of fucked up and I don't like that other people like this. Killing Stalking ran until March of 2019 and seemed to have faded into obscurity when it came to internet fandom spaces at large. It became one of those series that people only talked about in the, whoa, y'all remember that? Kind of way, and not much else was said outside of dedicated fandom spaces. Fans were left to read on their own as we saw the conclusion of Sang-woo and Yoonbum's story. As far as fandoms go, the actual Killing Stalking fandom, in my experience, is pretty tame. I think that's got a lot to do with many of the readers that stuck with the series beyond the Yuri on Ice pipeline were adults. And this is not going to be their first fandom rodeo. I've not seen or heard anything too wild or incriminating going on in the Killing Stalking fandom. There's no doxing, there's no people using this series to be a predator, there's no Sharpie baths and hot gluing things to your head for cosplay, there's no spit bucket. I'm sorry, I'm saying a lot of negative things about Homestuck. They were just really infamous. The only controversy surrounding the fandom that I have seen since getting into this comic in 2016 is just the Yuri on Ice pipeline and the accusation that fans are trivializing and romanticizing abuse. And I'm sure some did. There are so many people on this planet. But I fear that's to be expected. Not everyone reads with nuance, and some people don't always read with a critical mind, and not everyone will get the same things out of a piece of media. That is not exclusive to Killing Stalking. The writer of Killing Stalking has also talked about not wanting to trivialize the abuse in her story, and I do think she did a decent job at showing the situation for the horror that it is. It didn't feel glorified or like something you were supposed to be like really into in a weird way. Actually, the biggest issue with Killing Stalking is actually misogyny and the real-life misogyny and violence women face in South Korea, and how the violence towards women in the comic mirrored that in a way Korean fans found distasteful and worth dropping the comic over. But the comic has not hit like that for a Western audience, and fandom discussion isn't usually about that aspect of the story. The only other thing I haven't mentioned that I think impacted the perception of the Western fandom is the perception of BL and fujoshis outside of Killing Stalking. Fans of BL are typically seen as weird straight women fetishizing gay men by those who are not fans of BL and find the whole thing off-putting. While that can be true for some, it is not the full picture, and in my experience, is not even the majority of fans. Most BL fans I know, especially in America or in English-speaking fandom spaces, are queer women or just queer people in general who are using BL to have a nice, good romance story. I know a lot of people who are not interested in straight romances at all whatsoever, but they do enjoy exploring queer stories, both yuri and yaoi, the girls' love and the BL. And that's fine. Like, nobody's being weird about real-life gay men. But there is this stereotype of a fujoshi, a fan of BL, being a straight girl or woman who even went as far as to call real-life gay men yaoi, and being weird about real-life couples that they see in public. There's this blurring of fiction and reality in this stereotype that is concerning at best, downright harassment at worst. I'm not saying this never happened, but to paint an entire fan community as the loud, oftentimes children that were entering fandom spaces for the first time is in bad faith. I have never met or witnessed or seen anyone who was a fan of Killing Stalking be this way towards queer relationships and queer men. During the 2010s, there were also a lot of Fujo bait anime like Free Iwatobi Swim Club that dominated spaces like Tumblr, with everyone calling it gay and treating it like a BL when it is decidedly not. This sort of fan treatment can be seen across all fandoms and all genres, but it began to strike a nerve in some anime fans that believed all fujoshis were delusional and that animes like Yuri on Ice weren't gay because no one explicitly says they're gay. This did lead to a lot of discourse on if Killing Stalking is actually a queer story, and those that leaned more into the horror started to downplay the messed up relationship and consider those who saw it as delusional. Sang-woo himself even says he's not gay at one point in the story. However, he does continue to engage in a sexual relationship with Yoon Bum at certain points. Sang-woo's character has a lot of things wrong with him, and his sexuality is something that is very messy for him due to some abuse he suffered as a child. So we're not gonna get into all that. I think the most indicative part of Killing Stalking being a BL is the publisher that publishes it labels it as a BL. So I think that's pretty clear. Killing Stalking did see a resurgence of cultural relevance for a moment due to someone announcing that they were going to make an animation of it. And I think there was also a live action announced at some point. I don't know if that's actually being made. I am a little hesitant, but also I'm the kind of person that finds these types of stories easier to digest when they're animated or in a comic form versus live action. As for the animation, the previews looked cool and it was going to be an indie project, not like some anime studio. And as far as I know, the project is either still a work in progress or totally abandoned. I've not really heard much about it since like 2021, so there's that. Killing Stalking also benefited from TikTok and people getting into anime, manga, manhwa, and webcomics while in lockdown. And the series saw that same disgust it once did in the years prior, this time with less discussion of its artistic merit as a horror story. Fandom is decidedly different in the 2020s versus the 2010s and prior. And while Killing Stalking is unfairly played up to be the worst thing on the planet prior to 2020, 2020's fandom spaces have evolved further into the more Puritan mindset we saw becoming popular in fandom in the late 2010s. It would be disingenuous to discuss the reputation of Killing Stalking without addressing the proverbial elephant in fandom space. The rise of fascism and integration of conservatism and evangelical values into fandom and internet culture at large. Fandom spaces have never been perfect, and even in the 2000s and early 2010s, fandom had infighting and people made their dislike of something everyone else's problem. That's just how people are. However, I'm not sure if anyone's noticed, there was a cultural shift in fandom in the mid to late 2010s that was holding hands with the cultural shift in America that allowed for Donald Trump to be elected as president. And the shit show that is set to ruin everyone's life that has since followed. One can only hope things aren't worse by the time I actually finish this video. This I wrote in July 25th of this year. I don't want to talk about politics on this channel because I like escapism. But anyway, there have been a lot of extensive discussion online of this culture shift and linking it back to Gamergate and the fallout of that. The long and short of it, to put what I have to say about fandom and Killing Stalking into perspective, As the broader culture became more conservative, fandom culture followed. Common discourse amongst fans began to sound like conservative and evangelical talking points, and there became a blatant disregard for freedom of expression as teenagers and young adults online struggled to deal with the discomfort disturbing media brought. Killing Stalking was one of those series that were propped up as gross, shocking, and borderline obscene, something that should be banned. I've read the entire thing. While it does have explicit moments and is definitely not some romantic goal one should strive for, and definitely not something that I think everyone should read, because not everyone needs to read Killing Stalking. It is by no means obscene. I don't think it's worthy of being banned. It's not for everyone, sure, and that's fine. No one is obligated to like it, no one is obligated to read or engage with it. However, as the culture has become more puritanical, more conservative, more and more people take it upon themselves to engage with content they don't like and virtue signal about it. Ooh, look at how good I am. I think the psychological horror comic is bad and it makes you a bad person if you read it. So I'm obviously a good person for not reading it, or at least reading it enough to know that I hate it. Killing Stalking got caught up in this, and I do truly believe the widespread negative reputation wouldn't have been leading the conversation about the comic if it had come out a few years earlier. But I do know it'd also have been a lot worse if it came out a few years later. At this point, Killing Stalking only comes up in niche conversations, usually by people who enjoyed it. I've been a fan of Killing Stalking. I even play a game with myself every time I'm at the bookstore. If they have Volume 1 of Killing Stalking, I have to get it. I've been playing this game for a year now, and so far I'm still marked safe from collecting the physical copies of Killing Stalking. They always have like volumes 2, 4, and 8. They never have volume 1. It's actually comical how long this has been going on. It would be disingenuous for me to deny the impact Killing Stalking has had on me. It's the car wreck I can't look away from, the messed up story that I found incredibly interesting. The horror of it all is something I am genuinely interested in exploring in fiction. It even loosely inspired the script I wrote for my senior project in college. Killing Stalking is a chilling exploration of two incredibly fucked up individuals. Two people who have been neglected and abused themselves, coming together to make each other worse. But at the same time, becoming one another's safe space in a way. These two men will do anything but go to therapy, do anything else but try and heal from the trauma they've experienced. And people on the internet either love it or they hate it. And I think that's why people hate the Killing Stalking fandom, or at least they did. I don't know if people still do. I never see people talking about it like super recently, other than when I bring it up and some of my friends are like, yeah, that was wild. Or they talk about how they were kind of pushed into it when they weren't ready, and that should not have happened. I am sorry for anyone who was misled into reading this comic and ended up getting more than they signed up for, or biting off more than they could chew. I just find all of this really interesting and fun to talk about and look into, because understanding why people are the way that they are and like do the things that they do and feel the way that they feel is something that I find fascinating. I love a good fandom history. I love to know why people, or why fandoms are the way that they are, or why people view fandoms the way that they do. And Killing Stalking, I think, only has a bad reputation. One, because the media is not for everyone. And two, it was just the pipeline from Yuri on Ice. That's it. That's the reason Killing Stalking gets called The Trenches. Easily one of the more chill fandoms I've ever been in. Anyway, that's it for me. Hopefully, I will see you guys very soon. I'm feeling very into the Halloween spirit, so I've got quite a few videos planned that are Halloween-esque, about media that could be Halloween-esque, or just about, like, horror in general. Anyway, I will see you guys in my next video. I might even upload it next week. Wild. Alright, that's it for me. Bye!